Financing for Development, Unlocking Investment Opportunities. A New Era in Development Finance with Joaquim Levy.
Until the beginning of the new millennium, few people had dared to imagine a world in which governments would come together to develop measurable goals aiming at eradicating extreme poverty, ending hunger, and ensuring universal access to primary and secondary education in every nation. However, that changed with the birth of the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000 and got an extraordinary boost in 2015 with the endorsement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, after nations had agreed on a framework to finance these goals in the Addis Ababa UN conference in the summer of that year. The SDGs, or the global goals, aim at not only ending extreme poverty, but also doing it sustainably while protecting the planet and leaving no one behind. The World Bank Group's goals of eradicating extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity are aligned with these SDGs. The SDGs are ambitious, and the magnitude of financing required to achieve them exceeds the current level of financing available for development in quite a significant measure. In particular, official development assistance alone will not allow us to reach these goals. Indeed, the SDG goals will not be achieved without new sources of public and private financing, as well as new approaches to do things. Just to give you some context, official development assistance, the ODA, it stands at roughly $135 billion a year, and its growth is limited by budgetary constraints faced by donor governments in the world. Also, while the World Bank Group, along with the 5 regional MDBs, committed $400 billion for the next 3 years, the annual demand just for infrastructure investment in developing countries will be quite larger than these combined resources. On the other hand, there are very large pools of private resources, in particular of institutional investors, which could find profitable use in infrastructure around the globe. However, currently, a very small share of private funds is being channeled towards investment that support development objectives, while much of these funds have the potential to be invested in long-term development projects in emerging markets and developing countries, with also relevant implications for addressing the risks of climate changes. Opportunities in these markets must first be unlocked to crowd-in private sector. So the question is, how can MDBs and the World Bank in particular help unlock these opportunities? To understand what you can do, let's first look at the environment in which we are now operating. In this respect, we have entered a new and exciting era in developing finance. The Addis Ababa conference I mentioned produced the so-called Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the 4A, which is a groundbreaking agreement in a number of ways. First, it recognized the critical role of the private sector in achieving the SDGs, not only the finance the private sector can provide, but also the innovative solutions and approach they can bring. Second, it focused not on the amount of development aid available, but how to use it in a catalytic way to unlock investment opportunities and crowd in additional sources of public and private finance. Third, the framework also calls on the multilateral development banks, the MDBs, such as the World Bank Group, to be bold and innovative in developing new approaches and mediate public-private solutions that mobilize all types of finance, public, private, domestic, and international, all for development. And finally, it calls for unprecedented levels of cooperation, partnership, and coordination among the MDBs, UN, private sectors, civil society, academic organizations, think tanks, and governments. Because we know that no one organization alone has the resources or the capacity to meet the very large challenge of financing the SDGs on its own. All of these points are really showing us an environment where we, MDBs, can innovate and work on the mobilization of private resources to finance development. The good thing about this challenge is that if there is ever a right time to make this shift towards mobilization, it is now. And here is why. Let's take first a minute to look at the current global economic factors that are shaping our world. I would say that the combination of surplus savings and low private investment in advanced economies has resulted in a low growth, low interest rate environment. This poses significant challenges for, of course, long-term investors, as these funds earn marginally low or negative yields. The absence of meaningful investment opportunities in some spaces has actually created anxieties, which feed back into lower confidence in the future and further depresses economic activity and interest rates. There may be many reasons for surplus savings. According to some analysts, demographics and technological changes are playing important roles in generating this surplus. In contrast, potentially high productive investment opportunities in developing countries with young populations await sufficient financing to be challenged to them. So, bridging this gap by unlocking investment opportunities in developing countries could generate welfare gains to both advanced and developing nations. It is worth emphasizing the principle behind the private sector mobilization for financing SDG. It is that well-structured infrastructure projects can help reduce the current imbalance between savings and investment that you just mentioned, between current wealth and the need of future income streams to pension in aging societies. And through that, we can know that channeling surplus savings in advanced economies to long-term investment in developing countries can create a win-win for both sides. We can also realize that shifts in international investment patterns are urgent for climate financing too. With all the additional impact on development and long-term growth that a deterioration in our climate conditions could entail if you don't have this shift. A lack of long-term capital is today pushing countries and cities towards relatively dirty solutions which require less upfront investment. Sometimes you use some fossil fuels instead of renewables, or you just allow urban sprawl over compact planned cities, or individual vehicles over mass transit. There are many, many examples where you see that for lack of investment, you have solutions that in the short term may appear less expensive but have long-term impact in development. Action to shift investment partners is therefore urgent before more decisions are made that lock in carbon-reliant infrastructure over the long term. So, directing idle long-term private savings in advanced economies toward green technology in carbon-intensive emerging markets would reduce the footprint of progress, while having the potential of creating new meaningful income streams to global investors, therefore enhancing macroeconomic stability while supporting climate resilience of all these countries. Well, this is a very good idea, but there are clear indications that the risk appetite and absorption capacity of many private investors, including many institutional investors, is not fully compatible with many of the opportunities available in development countries. So the unlocking of some of these opportunities will require a reduction in this gap between the supply and demand for risk. And finding the resources and mechanisms to bridge this gap across geographies and demographies is a public policy issue with potential fiscal implications to advanced and developing economies. Reducing this gap will require also coordination among MDBs, government, and the private sector, as well as financial innovation. It may require also strengthening the regulatory environment as well as tax-raising capacity in host countries. It's a huge agenda. But the World Bank Group is taking a number of steps to facilitate this coordination We should remind that the role of multilateral institutions has always been to facilitate coordination, sometimes within governments, sometimes among governments, or sometimes between governments and the private sector. But for this purpose, of course, we need to chart a path, follow a strategy, and communicate with all stakeholders. This is an exciting time for development. And I'm very glad that you're taking this course. I like to thank you, and I really hope that you enjoy and you learn throughout all the sessions that you'll be going through. Thank you very much.